for having us.
Great. So I thought before we dive into some of the specific programs, maybe could you walk us through a brief overview of CRISPR's platform and some of the more recent accomplishments of the company?
I'm happy to do that. I think we're entering a pivotal stage in the growth and development of the company. For those who don't know the history of the company, CRISPR Therapeutics was founded in 2013 with the vision of developing transformative and potentially curative medicines for patients with serious diseases. We were started with the IP estate that we licensed from Dr. Emmanuel Charpentier, who won the Nobel Prize for elucidating CRISPR-Cas9 in 2021. I think in 2020. I think lots happened in the last few years, but all the developments in the CRISPR space have been going at breakneck speed. I think we've gone from a platform with a tremendous amount of promise to being on the cusp of filing a BLA or biologics license application for what could be the first CRISPR-based therapy in the world. This is our CTX001 program, which we're co-developing together with Vertex Pharmaceuticals, where we've dosed a number of patients, and the data are simply remarkable. Beyond that, we've grown the company and developed our portfolio in such a way where we have 4 different franchises. Obviously, the sickle cell and thalassemia portion. We have the immuno-oncology franchise, where we have very promising data for allogeneic RTs. That could be the future of cancer treatments, both in heme malignancies as well as solid tumors. We have a regenerative medicine franchise where we're developing organs off the shelf, and we're starting with pancreas, where we've dosed a patient already. And we have in vivo applications where we send the CRISPR-Cas9 machinery in either in a viral or a non-viral package into the patient's body to a particular organ of interest to make the edit that we desire to ameliorate the disease or to, in some cases, cure the disease. So those are the 4 franchises and made tremendous progress. We've dosed over 150 patients to date as a company. We have 6 programs in the clinic that are progressing across different indications, and we continue to make progress on our entire portfolio, both in vivo and ex vivo, which we're quite proud of. In parallel, I think we've built tremendous capabilities. I think we have our own manufacturing facility that's come online now, based in Massachusetts. We have over 500 people at the company, but a fully integrated company with all sorts of functions, fully mature and developed, including regulatory, clinical operations, translation, biometrics, and all sorts of advanced functions. So I think we've built a company that's gaining momentum. It's a flywheel effect, and we'll continue to bring more programs into the clinic and prosecute them through the clinic.
All right, excellent. So I think a great place to start and dive right in would be the immuno-oncology programs or for Allogeneic RT. So last October, we saw an update for the CTX110 program in DLBCL, and we're expecting to see initial top-line data for CTX120 and 130 the first half of this year. So allogeneic RT programs are still relatively new in development, at least compared to the autologous counterparts, and there's not yet an approved allogeneic RT product. So just broadly speaking, could we maybe discuss the bar for success here? Do you think that allogeneic RT programs will have to match the efficacy of autologous RT in order to be a commercial success?
Yeah, I think if I look back at the modern war on cancer, the history of medicines against cancer, we've gone through different phases. We had small molecules, then we've had a set of antibodies, and now we're getting to this world of cell therapies. Generally people have seen cancer as a death sentence when it comes to late-stage cancer. And the second thing we talk to, as a lot of patients talk about cancer treatment, is their worries about how toxic it's going to be. Oh my God, am I going to lose my hair? Am I going to lose my nails? Am I going to have skin issues, GI issues, peripheral neuropathy? And I think that's been the notion of these toxic cancer regimens. And here, I think we're starting a new era where these cell therapies are very targeted and can kill the cancer and eliminate the cancer, but are generally, benign when it comes to a lot of these side effects we're talking about. And I think the profile that we show here with allogeneic RTs, I think in the first gen version already has a risk-benefit profile and that is quite attractive. I think we're seeing efficacy near levels of autologous CAR-Ts in CD19 positive malignancies, but a much more favorable safety profile that may allow these therapies to go into the community settings and outpatient settings, and expand the reach and access for these therapies to patients suffering from these malignancies. So that's really important to understand. So I think that's a Gen 1. There's going to be Gen 2, Gen 3, Gen 4 programs as we have the ability to continuously improve these programs with more edits and more engineering. And those programs will continue to improve along efficacy, right? Along the efficacy dimension while maintaining the safety profile, hopefully. And so I think, you're going to see a wave of cell therapies in cancer, and they're going to be the most important way we fight cancers, at least in heme malignancies in the next 5 years, and then into solid tumors beyond that as well. Feel very confident about our thesis around cell therapies with editing in cancers. With CD19, I think we already have a profile, a target product profile that where CTX110 could be a product that could benefit thousands of patients, not just in the US, but globally from a business standpoint, at margins that are attractive relative to what autologous products are seeing, and create a real business out of it. Now, obviously, it's a competitive space with bispecifics and autologous therapies and everything else, but I think allogeneic RTs can take a majority of that market share if with the risk-benefit profile that we see. So we're quite positive about that, and have started dosing patients in our pivotal trial. I think beyond that, I think we have the other CAR Ts that we can talk about, but also the next generations of CAR Ts, which I think are going to be even so much better than the first generation.
There's a lot of points we could expand on there, but first I would just like to loop back around to the potential access and cost benefits of an allo CAR T. Since there are these potential benefits there compared to auto, do you see both allo and auto competing for the same patient segments, or could the allo therapies potentially reach a whole separate patient segment than autologous therapies currently are?
Well, I think in the academic settings, you'll certainly have some, competition between autologous and allogeneic therapies, because I think some of these top academic centers have access to both. And then depending on certain patients and certain the profile of the patient, you may see, them going to allogeneic or autologous. It's hard to say right now. But I think over time, what's going to happen is allo therapies are going to leapfrog and move into frontline therapies faster than autologous therapies. It's very hard to do frontline trials with autologous therapies, where it's possible to do that with allogeneic and also combine with existing frontline regimens, right? I think in the community settings, it's very clear that allo is going to be the way to go, because autologous therapies have really not made their way into community settings. The safety profile of autologous therapies is not supported by the infrastructure that community oncology practices have, even if it's large cancer networks. And I think in that sort of environment, especially with the payment models that are in place, I think allogeneic have a huge advantage.
All right, understood. So you also just commented, and it was disclosed yesterday in the earnings report, that you did dose the first patient in the pivotal arm of the ongoing trial of CTX110. I don't believe there's been much actually disclosed about the trial design around that pivotal arm, or how closely the design of that arm will match the previous arms in that study. So could you maybe provide some commentary around plans for that cohort, either size of that treatment arm, or anything regarding the lympho depletion or redosing protocols?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to do that. I think conceptually, I think what we have is relatively similar patient population as what we looked at last time, relapsed refractory NHL patients. The way we're going to dose is we're going to do the first dose with the standard flu-cy lympho depletion, and then at day 28, then we begin prepping the patient for a consolidation dose. So that's the major change here, is that the patients will get a second dose after about a month to make sure that we completely eliminate the cancer in those patients, right? So that's a big change. Again, they'll go through flu-cy conditioning a second time around. In terms of the size of the trial, and to technically call it a phase 3, we do have to go through a few more regulatory meetings and gain alignment with regulators. But we believe that this trial design can be pivotal. The typical size of these trials is somewhere in the 75 to 120 patient range, as you've seen with single-arm approvable trials in the past, or analogs to this trial. And there's a certain duration of follow-up for the patients after they've all been treated. But I think, while there are technical aspects to align with on regulators, I think this pivotal design is one we believe can be successful, and that we want to get going as soon as possible, enroll as soon as possible. And we've already begun enrolling patients in this trial.
All right, great. One of the points you also brought up a bit earlier was manufacturing and the manufacturing facility. So could you speak a little bit as to where capacity is now in manufacturing for the CAR-T products, and what sort of scale up would need to happen to transition from clinical capacity to commercial scale?
Yeah, I think one of the choices we made as a company is with CTX001, we started off with the commercial process as soon as we began clinical trials. That has allowed us to move very quickly towards that BLA filing and not have a comparability analysis. I think we're trying to do the same for all our products now. I think for the immuno-oncology products and the CAR-Ts, we want to build capacity for manufacturing and the process that's commercial ready. I was saying this on in a different forum. The manufacturing capacity that we have built in Boston, the way we've designed the suites, a single suite has 10x the production capacity as a suite that you might imagine for autologous CAR-T or for other allogeneic products. That's because the way we've designed the flow and the process. And so the facility that we have right now can supply thousands of doses ultimately at commercial scale with the design that we have. Now, we still do rely on CDMOs as well. We want to maintain a hybrid of internal and CDMO manufacturing because it's not just meant for 110, 120, 130. And we also want to bring next-gen programs into the clinic, and those we would manufacture internally at our manufacturing facility. I think all that said, I think we're well placed for commercial scale capacity and capability from a manufacturing standpoint.
All right, and talking about those potential next-gen programs, so all three of the CAR-T programs currently in the clinic incorporate both the track disruption and the B2M deletion. So thinking ahead to potential second-gen products with additional edits or different edits, how should we think about both the number of edits that can be incorporated into the product and how you would choose the targets for disruption?
Yeah, I think, our notion on product development here is that we're going to be working on Gen 1, Gen 2, Gen 3, regardless of what happens to each generation. I think it's a notion from the tech industry where, with iPhones or other products, you always have next-gen versions coming at discrete intervals. I think we're going to have new generations of products coming every 2 years, even for the same target. And that's because we can do massively parallel screening and identify edits to make in these CAR-Ts that make them much more cytotoxic and maintain the same safety profile, hopefully. So the edits that we're going to make 2 additional edits in the next-gen versions. We haven't disclosed the edits yet, but I don't know that they're obvious edits whenever we disclose them. I think we've hit upon very unique edits that make these cells highly cytotoxic at a much lower dose in animal models. And I think that we'll be talking more about that at some point this year. But we want to complete, sort of move forward the enrollment with our existing Gen 1 product with CTX110 before we start talking about the next gen version.
All right, perfect. And just one more question on the Allogeneic RT program before we move on. So we did host a KOL panel on Monday here at our conference, and some of the KOL feedback in the CAR-T space did suggest that optimizing lympho depletion regimens could be critical for optimal CAR-T cell performance and could affect the cell expansion and engraftment. So it seems like in the pivotal arm of the CTX110 trial, those protocols seem like they're locked into me, and please tell me if I'm wrong. But thinking ahead to this future CTX120 and CTX130 trials, is there any room there for experimenting with different lymphodepletion protocols or tweaking that and optimizing that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you can. It's simple. I think the greater the degree of lymphodepletion, the more ability for the CAR-Ts to expand. But you only want to do it to the extent where you preserve the safety profile of this therapy, right? You don't want to, have toxic lymphodepletion regimens that make it make the product commercially not viable. So I think there's that balance you need to strike. But I think there's ability to tweak the lymphodepletion. I think when CTX130, again, it's a different patient population, and we're trying to see how they tolerate lymphodepletion. Can they do 2 lymphodepletions or not? I think all those considerations come into play as we think about lymphodepletion regimen and the extent of it. But we are sticking at this point with flu-cy lymphodepletion. We're not introducing new agents into the mix. I think with CTX120, I think that the bar obviously is very high with Legend and the data that they posted with autologous therapies. And the question is, how much can you tweak versus go to the next gen and leapfrog a therapy like Legend. So I think those are all considerations as we think about development of the other 2 CAR Ts or any of the future CAR Ts that we bring into the clinic.
All right. Great. If we can move on to CTX001 program in sickle cell disease and beta thalassemia. So the current guidance from both you and your partner Vertex indicate, well, first that you reached a target enrollment for both programs, and that regulatory submissions are planned for later this year. From listening to some of the commentary on the last Vertex conference call, it does seem like it may be a bit of an open question as to how many patients and what duration of follow-up is required for these regulatory submissions in sickle cell disease and beta thal. So maybe could you just outline what the base case assumptions are in order to meet the guidance of the end 2022 submission?
Yeah, I think, one of the things that it's not quite visible to the investor world is, how these regulatory interactions go when you have an RMAT designation or a breakthrough designation or some of these designations. I think what you end up with is an environment where the regulators are trying to help you get to that filing, and it's a very fluid discussion and sometimes frequent discussion to align on all the requirements. Now, there's both macro and very minutia of requirements that may need to go and be aligned around the filing package. But broadly speaking, if you look at the number of patients, I think, we said we've dosed over 70 patients. That's well over the number that we think would be necessary to go into a filing package from a efficacy data standpoint. From a safety data standpoint, it's always better to have a big database of patients or a big data set, or as big a data set as you can. But for efficacy, I think with the transformative data that you're seeing with CTX001, the question is, how much more benefit is there to seeing a larger data set versus, say, 20 patients or something like that, right? I think that's what we're trying to nail down in the regulatory discussions. But in terms of duration of follow-up, I think there's some precedent out there with Bluebird and other companies around, is 6 months sufficient? Is a year required? Is a year and a half? In terms of observation window. But I think all that we worked out. I think Vertex and us, we both hope that we can file by the end of this year. And we're acting with a sense of urgency and doing everything we can to file in that time frame.
Great. And I guess as you do continue these discussions, you and Vertex continue these discussions with the FDA, are there any expectations to share these regulatory updates with investors as there's additional updates with the agency, or should we just expect to get an update closer to the end of the year?
We'll certainly have an update on our data and a general program update at some point this year. I think it's a very competitive space. I think the reason for not disclosing every little detail is not because we don't want to be transparent about it. It's because it's one, we want to keep in mind that it's a competitive space, and two, I think both Vertex and us have been very rigorous in terms of making sure that we're fully confident about a certain path and the pathway to approval before we say anything or make comments about it. And I think we both sort of bear the same sense of responsibility around this, especially given the diseases at stake and the patients that are suffering from these diseases. And we do want to get these therapies to them as soon as we can.
Right, understood. And there are a few investors asking about the ViaCyte collaboration and CTX210. So I'd like to move there quickly before we run out of time. So the company recently announced that you dosed the first patient earlier this year. What sort of clinical data should we expect to see from these first patients, and what would be considered a win for the initial clinical readout?
Yeah, there are a number of aspects that we're trying to understand in these initial clinical trials. First and foremost, obviously, safety. Can these cells be in a device be implanted into patients in a safe manner. I think ViaCyte have shown that they can do that with unedited cells before, so that bodes well, but safety is always first and foremost. Beyond that, I think there's two pieces to it on the efficacy. One is understanding immune evasion. Are these cells able to evade the host immune system? And are they able to find their niche in the host and multiply and differentiate fully? So that's sort of question number one. And second is, once they differentiate fully, can they produce insulin in response to glucose or sugar in the bloodstream? Those are two sort of questions. I think because of the nature of the cells we implant, it does take some time for the cells to differentiate. So if you want to have a data set that's 3 to 5 patients with at least 6 months of follow-up, I think we'll obviously be collecting data all throughout the year. We don't know yet at this point whether we'll be disclosing the data this year or early next year. But in any case, I think we're excited to be collecting the data, understanding both the immune evasion part of this, as well as the insulin part of this. I think on the insulin piece, I think what's important to understand is the level of insulin production is tunable. I think with the cell dose, the clones we pick, et cetera, I think it's more the responsiveness that we're looking for as an efficacy signal. And if you're able to do that, that I think is a huge win with these early trials in type 1 diabetes.
All right. And when we think about the exact edits that are made to these cells in order to evade the immune system, how different are these edits than the ones that are incorporated into the Allo CAR T programs?
Yeah, I think we've disclosed 2 of the edits. We're carrying forward the beta 2M edit from our Allo CAR T. We do think that's important. That's an important edit. A lot of IP filed around it. We think it was necessary for this product. We've also inserted the PDL1 gene into these cells. We do think that provides immune evasion as well, as we've learned from tumors, for instance. And those are 2 of the edits. There's an additional 2 edits that we have not disclosed yet that we will in due course of time. We're just waiting for some of our IP filings to mature around those edits. One of them at least is not very obvious. This all comes out of our screening. We do large-scale screening to identify what targets will be the best to knock out or knock in into these cells. And while we see a lot of the companies chasing the usual suspects on the edits, I think we've hit upon a couple of novel ones.
I got it. And thinking about the overall opportunity here in type 1 diabetes, how large of a market do you think there is for a product like this for a regenerative cell, product in type 1 diabetes?
It'll come in layers. I think we're talking about serious type 1 diabetes patients first, then extend to all type 1 diabetes patients, then serious type 2 diabetes patients, and then you can imagine a pretty big portion of type 2 diabetes patients. I think if you're a company that's making revenues off of selling insulin, this is pretty worrisome. I think this could be a pretty transformative product that I think could bring a profound change in not just in the lifestyle of these patients suffering from serious diabetes, but in outcomes for these patients.
Right. We do have a question coming in from the investing audience. The question is, both ViaCyte recent reports have C-peptide much lower than the Vertex single patient data. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think in the published data that is the case with one of the early versions of the ViaCyte product. And as I said, I think that's really tunable. We can pick clones that produce more insulin, which would result in greater C-peptide. We can also make edits to increase the production of insulin. It's more the responsiveness and the metabolic network that's critical here. And if you can see that, then all the other parameters are tunable.
Right, excellent. Another question coming from the audience. Could you just maybe speak about some of the changes, recent changes, the new head of R&D and the search for a CMO?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as we've grown as a company, I think what we wanted to do is, make sure that we bring on leaders that have seen the full gamut of development, from early stage development to late stage development. And I think we're looking for a CMO that has that experience. I think it's very difficult for one head of R&D to manage both the research aspects as well as all the development aspects. So we now have a dedicated head of research for most of our portfolio and a separate dedicated research head for our regenerative medicine efforts. And then we're going to bring on a CMO. So I think we're just bringing on more accomplished and experienced and passionate leaders to the table here as we look to expand our portfolio and then push forward a portfolio with a sense of urgency.
Very great. And it looks like we're coming down to only 1 minute left. So I'd like to end by asking just a general question. It does look like CRISPR has a very busy year ahead. I'd like just to hear your thoughts on where investors should be placing their focus as the year progresses.
We're looking forward to the next 12 to 18 months. I think there's going to be a lot happening. I think we're going to be talking a lot more about in vivo going forward. I think Regen Med is a huge focus for us. So I think we're, the four franchises are all moving forward. I think on the one hand, it'd be exciting to mature the sickle cell and thalassemia franchise and get it to commercial. That's a significant milestone, not just for us as a company, but for the entire sector. On the other, and then we have our immuno-oncology, which is our core focus, but we're spending a lot of time on Regen Med and in vivo as well, because we want to be a diversified company with a broad portfolio, and that's the sort of preeminence we want to establish in the space, especially with the scale that we have and the capital balance that we have that we can bring to bear.
All right, great. Well, looks like we are out of time. Thank you.